Welcome back to our channel where the dark corners of the world are brought to light. Tonight we're diving into the chilling world of long-haul truckers, guardians of the open road, who sometimes encounter things far more terrifying than isolation or fatigue. In this episode, Truckers' Terror: 3 Disturbing Encounters on the Road will explore 3 spine-tingling tales of strange happenings and unspeakable horrors faced by those who brave the endless highways. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to thank you, our incredible viewers, for your continued support. Your likes, comments, and shares mean the world to us. We wish you all good health, happiness, and a touch of caution when you're out there on the road. Now, turn down the lights, and let's dive into the terror. Story 1: The Mysterious Car in the Mojave Desert. I've spent 15 years driving through the American heartland, hauling goods across stretches of empty, forgotten roads. In that time, I've learned that the road holds its own secrets, things that the casual observer never sees, and that the mind struggles to comprehend when it does. The desert, particularly the Mojave, is one such place. I should know I've driven its vast, merciless expanse more times than I can count. And in all my years, I thought I had grown accustomed to its uncanny stillness, its suffocating isolation. I thought I understood it. But the night I found the car, that is the night everything changed. It was 2017. The time of year barely matters, but for the sake of reference, it was one of those late summer nights, when the sun had finally sunk beneath the horizon, but the heat lingered in the air like a phantom, settling into your skin, too close to comfort. The stars hung in the sky, distant and cold, as if they were watching me, watching us from some unfathomable distance. I was driving west, a stretch of road I had crossed 100 times before. The truck hummed beneath me, its engine a steady, mechanical pulse that matched the rhythm of the night. It was routine, almost mindless. Yet, as I drove through the desolate stretch of highway, something began to feel off. I can't quite explain it. It wasn't a sudden realization, but rather a slow shift, an uninvited presence that crept into the edges of my consciousness. The horizon, always so distant and abstract, felt closer, somehow too close. The weight of the air seemed heavier, like something immense was pressing down on the landscape, suffocating it in silence. And then I saw it. A red Ford Fusion, parked squarely in the middle of the road, its passenger door wide open. The sight was so out of place that at first I didn't believe what I was seeing. Out here, in the heart of nowhere, cars like that don't just appear. The Mojave is a place of extremes, a place where survival is a constant struggle, and there is no room for the trivialities of human existence. Who would stop here? Why would anyone stop here? The car sat there, as though it had been placed deliberately, with no regard for the geography around it. Its gleaming red surface stood out like a wound in the desert's ancient, unforgiving skin. The door swung gently in the wind, an empty invitation. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, but I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else entirely, a sense of curiosity, of compulsion. But in that moment, I did what I always do. I slowed down, pulled the truck over, and stepped out. The desert greeted me with its familiar, suffocating silence, as though the air itself had swallowed up every sound. The truck's engine turned off with a soft thud, leaving me alone with the night. I could feel the coolness of the air against my skin, but it wasn't comforting. It felt false, like a mask hiding the deeper truths of this place. I approached the car slowly, unsure of what I expected to find. My boots crunched against the gravel as I neared the abandoned vehicle. The passenger door was open, and the interior was dim, shrouded in the gloom of the desert night. I peered inside, but there was no one there. No driver, no passengers, just a mess of dust and old, crumpled paper, signs of a life left behind. Yet something was wrong. It wasn't just that the car had been abandoned, it was the way it had been abandoned. The car was clean, almost pristine, in a way that made no sense. The dust, the grime of the desert hadn't settled properly, as though the car hadn't been there long at all. It was as though someone had placed it there, made it appear abandoned, and then simply left. I walked around the car, my footsteps too loud in the dead of night, and that's when I noticed it. The trunk. It was locked, but more than that, there was something inside. Something that didn't belong there. I leaned down to peer through the grimy window of the trunk, and through the haze, I saw them. Garbage bags. Several of them, tightly packed, shoved into the back of the car like they were too big to fit properly. I couldn't see what was inside, but I didn't need to. I've seen things in this line of work: bodies, drugs, the detritus of people trying to escape something, but these bags felt different. They felt wrong. They had the same aura of decay as the car, like something had been carefully placed there, left to fester, to rot. The instinct I had built over years of driving in places like this flared up, a cold shiver that ran down my spine. Something was wrong here. Something was waiting. I should have walked away then. I should have gotten back into the truck and driven away, never looking back. But I didn't. Something inside me compelled me to stay, to find out what was inside that trunk. I walked to the back of the car and grabbed the handle. It didn't budge, locked tight just like I thought. But it wasn't just locked, it felt sealed. There was something deliberate about it, like the car itself was a message, a puzzle that demanded to be solved. That's when I heard it. The sharp, jarring crack of a gunshot. It came from somewhere distant, but it sliced through the stillness like a knife through soft flesh. My body froze, the air in my lungs evaporating in an instant. My heart, for a moment, forgot how to beat. I spun around, but there was no one, no sound except the quiet hum of the desert wind. The desert, I've learned, is full of things that aren't what they seem. Sometimes the silence can be louder than the noise. The absence of sound is just another kind of presence, and on that night it watched me. And then, as if summoned by that very moment, he appeared. He was tall, ragged, his clothes tattered from years of exposure, his face gaunt and sunken, like someone who had been left out here too long, forgotten by time itself. He held a rifle in one hand, a shovel in the other. Both were grimed with dirt, smeared with something darker, blood, maybe, or something worse. His eyes were wide, feverish, and they locked onto me with a kind of desperate intensity, as though seeing me was an intrusion, a mistake. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice raw and cracked, like something that hadn't spoken in a long time. "Get away from that car. You don't know what you're dealing with." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something about him, the way he stood there, half-formed in the moonlight, made the air feel thick, like it was choking me. His words didn't just ring in my ears, they clawed at my mind, scratching at something deeper. I wasn't meant to be here. None of us were. This desert, this place, it wasn't meant for people. It never had been. I stepped back, my heart thudding in my chest, and he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. The rifle swung around, aimed straight at me. "You don't belong here," he spat, his words harsh, filled with a hatred that had been born of something older than time. That's when I realized I wasn't supposed to leave. The car wasn't just a car. It wasn't just abandoned. It was part of something bigger. Something that had been waiting for me. For anyone who dared stop here. It wasn't a place you could simply pass through. It was a place you had to leave if you were lucky. I turned and ran. I don't know how fast I moved, but my feet carried me faster than I thought I could run. The world around me blurred, and the wind screamed in my ears, but all I could hear was the thundering of my heart. The truck was a blur of lights in the distance, a lifeline, and I reached it just as I heard his voice again, louder now, more desperate. "You can't leave. You're not meant to leave." He was chasing me, his words hanging in the air like a death sentence. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the truck roared to life. The engine howled, the tires skidded against the gravel, and I sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust behind me. The night swallowed the road ahead, and I dared not look back. The police arrived a few hours later, but by then everything was gone. The car, the man, the rifle, they had all vanished into the empty desert. It was as though they had never been there at all. The officers found nothing, no signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing but the echo of my words. They searched for hours, but in the end they found nothing to explain the encounter. And that was the worst part, the not knowing. The feeling that something had happened, something impossible and alien that couldn't be explained. That shouldn't have happened, but it did. And I haven't been able to shake the feeling that the Mojave is still waiting for me, that the road still watches, that something far older than us is out there, lying in wait. Maybe I wasn't meant to drive through the desert that night. Maybe no one is. But I'll tell you this, if you ever find yourself on that same stretch of highway, on a night when the stars are too close and the air feels too thick, keep driving. Don't stop. Never stop. Story 2, The Abandoned Gas Station. It's difficult to say how long I wandered through the fog after everything vanished. The gas station, the figure, the grotesque nightmare that had clawed its way into my very soul. Time no longer meant anything in the place where I found myself. There was no day or night, no beginning or end. There was only the silence that stretched into infinity, oppressive and stifling. I walked for what felt like hours, or perhaps it was minutes, I could not tell. The road beneath me was soft, yielding, as though the earth itself was absorbing my steps, swallowing them whole. With each step, the weight of that invisible presence, whatever it had been, whatever it was, pressed down harder on me. It was always there, just out of reach, but always close enough to make me feel its malignant gaze. It was as if something was feeding off me, gnawing at my very essence, slowly stripping away everything that made me who I was. The thought crossed my mind, had I left the gas station? Had I truly escaped? Or was I still there, lost in some kind of fevered dream where the boundaries between the real and the unreal no longer existed? I tried to focus on the road, to remember my purpose. The truck. I needed to find the truck. I needed to get back on the road, to drive anything to escape the stifling grip of the unknown, to escape the suffocating silence that pressed in from all directions. But the road was changing, I realized. It wasn't the same highway I had been on before. The lines on the asphalt had become jagged, as though they had been drawn by a hand trembling with madness. The trees that lined the edges of the road were twisted, their branches contorted in unnatural shapes, like gnarled hands reaching out to grab me, pull me back into the void. The ground beneath my feet had turned to something soft and spongy, as though the earth itself was alive, breathing with a slow, measured rhythm. I stumbled, nearly falling, my hands scraping against the rough bark of a nearby tree. The bark was slick, as though coated in something thick, something that clung to my skin and made my fingers tingle with a strange, unfamiliar sensation. It was not sap. No, this was something worse, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I didn't stop to examine it. I didn't want to know what it was. Panic began to rise in my chest, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My legs were moving on their own, driven by an instinct I didn't understand, propelling me forward, faster and faster, as though I were being chased by something I couldn't see but could feel, a presence just beyond the edge of my vision. I could hear it now, faint whispers, voices in a language I didn't know. The voices were growing louder, rising in volume until they drowned out everything else. The wind howled through the trees, the sound of it curling into the shapes of words, the words I couldn't quite catch but could feel pressing against my mind, urging me onward, deeper into the madness. I didn't stop to think. I couldn't. The world around me had become an endless blur of shapes and shadows, a twisted kaleidoscope that bent and distorted reality with every step I took. The whispers were everywhere now, inside my head, inside my bones. They were speaking to me, speaking of things I couldn't comprehend, speaking of things that made my stomach churn and my heart race with a kind of primal fear I had never known. Then There it was. The truck. My truck. It appeared out of nowhere, standing in the middle of the road, bathed in an eerie light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The fog clung to it, swirling around the red paint of the Freightliner, the headlights flickering like dying stars. The truck was a beacon, a dark anchor in the chaos that had swallowed everything else. I approached it, my legs heavy, as though they were made of lead. But I didn't hesitate. I didn't question why the truck was there, why it was waiting for me. It didn't matter. I just needed to get in, to start the engine, to feel the rumble of the diesel beneath me, and drive far away from this place. Away from the whispers, away from the suffocating grip of whatever force was stalking me. But as I reached for the door handle, something stopped me. A faint sound. A noise so soft, so subtle that I might have dismissed it if I hadn't been listening so intently. It was the sound of breathing. Shallow, uneven breaths coming from somewhere inside the cab. I froze. My heart stuttered in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, a chill running down my spine. I didn't want to look inside. I knew that if I did, I would see something that would tear my sanity apart, something that would burn itself into my mind forever. But I had no choice. The pull was too strong, an invisible force urging me closer, telling me to look, to face whatever it was that had followed me, that had been waiting for me. I opened the door. The interior of the truck was bathed in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the dashboard. The seats were empty, the sleeper berths still, as it had been when I first arrived. But the breathing, the steady, rhythmic inhalations came from behind the thick velvet curtains that separated the front of the cab from the rear. The sound was so close now, so distinct, that I could almost feel it, as if the breath itself were washing over me. I took a step back. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to pull back the curtain. But the urge was overwhelming, and before I knew it, my hand was reaching out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the soft fabric. I pulled the curtain back, and there it was. Not a person, not a thing, not even a shadow. There was nothing at all, just the emptiness. The berth was empty, no one, nothing was there. And yet the breathing continued. It filled the space, enveloped me, swirling around me like a thick fog. The sound seemed to come from every direction, from inside the walls, from beneath the bed, from the very air itself. I stepped back, heart pounding, breath coming in short gasps. The truck, the road, the world, it was all closing in on me, warping, twisting, pulling me deeper into the darkness. And then, as if it had never existed at all, the truck disappeared. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving nothing but an endless stretch of desolate highway, a black void that swallowed everything in its path. No gas station, no road, no truck. Only the suffocating silence. Oh, and then I realized I had never left. The nightmare, the one that had begun in that desolate, abandoned gas station, had never ended. It had only taken a different form, drawn me deeper into its maw. The whispers were still there, the suffocating weight still pressing on me. The figure still waited, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision, its cold fingers always there, waiting to reclaim me. And I knew, with a certainty that shattered what little of my mind remained intact, that I would never escape. Story 3: The Mysterious Movements in the Truck. The journey had begun like any other long, droning hours on the road, each mile stretching into the next, a monotonous blur of cracked asphalt and distant horizons. The truck, an old and weathered vehicle, hummed beneath me, its engine a dull throb that seemed to resonate with something deep within me, some dark resonance I couldn't place. Time itself had begun to stretch and twist in strange ways, its passage slipping away like sand through my fingers. I couldn't remember the last time I had slept properly. My thoughts, when I tried to catch them, were foggy, disjointed fragments that never seemed to settle into any coherent form. I'd been on the road for what felt like days, but the calendar on my phone showed I'd only been driving for a few hours. The highway stretched out before me, an infinite ribbon of nothing connecting me to no place. Nowhere at all. The endless, barren landscape surrounding me felt almost oppressive, as though it were designed to suffocate any hope of clarity, of meaning. There was no life out here, no sign of anything living. The air was dry, unnervingly still, as though even the wind had forgotten what it meant to move. The truck had become more than just a vehicle. It had transformed into a confining space, a kind of mobile cell that carried me further and further and further into this vast, unseen void. The hum of the engine filled my ears, a constant, unrelenting noise that seemed to press in on me. I couldn't escape it. It was as if the sound itself was a part of the road, part of the great, oppressive emptiness that surrounded me. Then, a sensation I couldn't explain, the feeling of being watched. At first, it was nothing more than a vague discomfort, a sense that something was wrong, something was out of place, but I dismissed it. Fatigue, I told myself. Just the usual toll of the road. But the sensation lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Every time I glanced into the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, something just beyond the frame of my vision, a shift in the shadows. I told myself it was nothing. After all, the cab was empty, just me and the road. There couldn't be anything back there. But then it happened again. The curtain, that simple strip of cloth that separated the cargo area from the cab, shifted. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, like a breath of wind passing through a cracked window. I could feel my pulse quicken. I told myself it was the wind, a draft pushing through the small gaps in the truck's frame. But even as I thought it, a terrible certainty grew in my chest. The air had felt stagnant for so long. There was no wind, no breath of life to stir that curtain. I glanced in the rearview mirror once more. There it was, an unmistakable shift. The curtain moved again, just a few inches, as if something or someone was gently pressing against it from the other side. The kind of motion you would expect only from something with intent, with purpose. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the road. It was something else. My breath caught in my throat. A heavy, cloying sensation of dread wrapped around me tight as a noose. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles turning white, as I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. This was just the product of too many hours on the road, the isolation, the exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. I could feel it. A presence, in the truck, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to pull over, to check, to make sure there was nothing lurking in the back of the truck. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Something held me there, as though the road itself had woven its tendrils into me, pulling me forward, forcing me to continue, to see what would happen next. And then another shift. This time it was more pronounced. The curtain moved more deliberately, a slow, almost fluid motion, as if something or someone was pushing it aside, inch by inch. I could almost hear the faint rustling of fabric, the sound echoing in the small, suffocating space. I turned my head sharply to the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the faint shadow of the curtain, swaying slightly. But I knew there was something back there. My heart hammered in my chest, a primal rhythm, a drumbeat of terror. I should have stopped. I should have pulled over and opened the door, but I couldn't. Fear held me in place, like a prisoner in my own mind. The idea of getting out, of confronting whatever was hiding behind that curtain, felt like an invitation to something far worse. It was as if by acknowledging it, I would somehow invite it into my world. But whatever it was, I was terrified of it. Terrified of what it might be. The road stretched out before me, endless and empty. The truck moved steadily forward, the hum of the engine the only sound in the cabin. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the dispatch number. The voice on the other end was calm, detached, but I couldn't focus on the words. My mind was fixed on the rearview mirror, on the shifting curtain, on the thing that waited behind it. Driver 419, the dispatcher said, her voice professional, too calm for the growing terror inside me. Is everything okay? I think there's something in my truck, I muttered, the words slipping out of my mouth before I could stop them. My voice was thin, quivering, barely above a whisper. Something's moving. In the back. There was a pause, a moment of uncomfortable silence. The dispatcher's voice came back, still steady, but now with an edge of annoyance. Driver, you're probably just tired. Take a break, get some rest, and everything will look better in the morning. I knew she couldn't understand. She hadn't felt what I had felt, the presence. The unshakable certainty that someone was back there. But I couldn't explain it. I couldn't make her see it, feel it. I hung up the phone. My hands were slick with sweat as I wiped them on my pants, trying to regain some sense of control. I couldn't stop staring at the rearview mirror, at that shadow, at that thing that was waiting. I had to know what it was. I had to look. I stopped the truck. The engine sputtered and died, the sudden silence almost unbearable. My breath was loud in the cabin, echoing back at me, too sharp, too insistent. The world outside seemed to close in, pressing down on me, as if the air itself were thickening. The moon hung overhead, distant and cold, its light casting strange, angular shadows on the barren landscape. I stepped out of the truck, the cold night air biting at my skin. I moved toward the rear of the truck, my footsteps slow, deliberate, each one heavy with the weight of what I knew I would find, or rather, what I feared I would find. The door to the cargo area was locked. I had checked it earlier just like I had checked everything else. But now as I stood before it, the lock felt fragile and significant, as though whatever was on the other side would rend it apart with ease, as if it were not meant to hold back anything at all. I reached for the handle, and that's when I heard it. The sound so soft, so faint, that for a moment I thought it might be my mind playing tricks on me. A scraping, a faint dragging noise, followed by a rustling. It was coming from inside the truck, from behind that door. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze. The sound stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the door creaked open, ever so slightly, as if something inside had pushed against it, just enough to let me know that it was no longer locked. It was as if it had never been locked to begin with. I hesitated, my breath caught in my chest. And then a shadow moved across the threshold. A figure, dark and shapeless, pressed against the door. It was not human. It was something else, something far older, far darker, its form too twisted to comprehend. The curtain in the cab stirred again, as though in response to its presence. I could feel the thing behind the curtain, the one that had been there all along, moving, shifting, aware. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, to escape. But I knew it was too late. Whatever was behind that curtain had been waiting, waiting for me to notice, waiting for the right moment. And now it had found me. The shadow in the cargo area moved again, this time more forcefully, pushing against the door. I could hear the groan of the metal, the snap of something snapping into place. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a creature. It was an idea. A thought that had taken form, had manifested in the void between the cracks of reality. I took one last look at the road ahead of me, but it was no longer there. The endless horizon had closed in, and the truck, the road, the world, everything was part of the thing behind the curtain now. It was waiting, just beyond the threshold, and I was no longer in control. I never had been. And that brings us to the end of Trucker's Terror, 3 disturbing encounters on the road. These stories remind us that the highways, vast and lonely as they are, can hold secrets darker than the night itself. From unexplainable apparitions to chilling encounters with strangers, The roads are more than just pathways, they're places where the boundaries between reality and the unknown become frighteningly thin. For truckers and travelers alike, these moments serve as a stark warning that even the most routine journey can turn into a nightmare. We want to take a moment to thank all of you for watching and supporting this channel. Your likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions mean the world to us and keep us motivated to bring you more chilling tales. If you've experienced something eerie or unexplained yourself, we'd love to hear your story in the comments. Together we can shed light on the mysteries that haunt our lives. Above all, we wish you good health and safety in all your travels. Whether you're navigating dark highways or simply living your daily life, stay alert and take care of yourself and those you love. The world is vast, unpredictable, and full of hidden shadows, but as long as we face it together, we can uncover its truths. Thank you for being part of our community. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video, where even more mysteries and unsettling tales await. Until then, take care. Remember, sometimes it's not just the road that stretches into the unknown, it's the stories that lie in wait, ready to be discovered.